Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by oldsschoollane.blogspot.com and is associated with manicexpression.com, thecomicbookcast.com, the reopened Nickelodeon Studios in Orlando, Florida Facebook page, and the PlayStation YouTube channel. Welcome to this episode of Casual Chats. I am Patricia, and I am here with a few special guests. You may know him from the Ghostbusters podcast and on Manic Expression. He is infamous Jak Klancy. Welcome back, Klancy.
Thanks for having me.
And, of course, we have none other than PlayStation member, Comic Book Cast member, and you may briefly remember him from the Christmas podcast. We have Tristen. Welcome back, Tristen.
What's up, guys?
So today we're going to be discussing about the video game company Naughty Dog in honor of its 30th anniversary. They worked on numerous games over the years, but the ones that are mostly well known are the Crash Bandicoot, Jak and Daxter, Uncharted series, and just recently The Last of Us. So I guess we'll discuss about how we first got introduced to a Naughty Dog game. So, Klancy, why don't you start?
The first Naughty Dog game I ever had was for one Christmas. My parents got me a original PlayStation, and it came with Crash Bandicoot Warped. And then later on, I went back and played the other Crash games.
All right, and what about you, Tristen?
Well, my first experience was not on my own PlayStation, but on my cousin's PlayStation. My uncle bought them a PlayStation, I think like in 96, 97, and he had the first Crash Bandicoot, and I came over one day and I played that. It was ball-bustingly difficult, but I loved it, and when I got my PlayStation for 98, I got the Crash Warped and Crash Bandicoot 2, and I played those to death.
Yeah, I remember for me, I first saw Crash Bandicoot in the commercials. They were featuring it all the time. And when I saw the commercials, I was like really hooked on it. My cousin owned the first PlayStation, and he didn't get Crash Bandicoot. He actually wasn't a huge fan of Crash Bandicoot. He was more of a fan of Spyro the Dragon. So I didn't get to play Crash. The first one that I played was Crash Bandicoot Warped. Then eventually I played the second one, and then I played the original one. So, of course, Naughty Dog started off in their early years, back in the 90s, and they worked on various games such as Keith the Thief, which is some sort of like action kind of game, and then there was Way of the Warrior, which was a Mortal Kombat clone for the 3DO. Well, I've never played any of those games, and for the most part, I don't hear anybody talking about them, so I guess we can start off with the game that most people are associated with, the first Crash Bandicoot that came out in 1996. So, with Crash Bandicoot, it was definitely trying to be competitive with Super Mario 64, which that was the game that introduced the 3D platforming, and that was where everybody was going at nowadays. It was all about that 3D games were the future. And yeah, it just involved with Crash Bandicoot being created by Dr. Neo Cortex, and the whole part of the game is that he had to stop them from world domination, and along the way he took down his minions. So, when replaying the original Crash Bandicoot, what did you guys think of it?
Still as difficult as ever.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard game. Actually, I think out of all of Naughty Dog's games, the first Crash Bandicoot is the one that doesn't really hold up if you play it now.
The thing about it is because unlike the other two, the PlayStation didn't have the analog controls yet, because the analog controls weren't introduced until 1997. So that kind of contributed, because you had to use the D-pad for 8 directions when it really isn't that good for it.
Yeah, definitely. It felt like a bit of a step backward when you consider that Super Mario 64 was the one that used the analog stick.
Yeah, and I love how the fact that they got most of out of the PlayStation with the first game. It's really good, but the reason that they chose boxes is because it's really easy for the PlayStation to use from the polygon count. So that's why Crash breaks boxes and stuff instead of doing other things.
Yes, and the original name of Crash Bandicoot was going to be Willy the Wombat, and the reason why they didn't use that was because there was already a character named Willy the Wombat on the TV show Tasmania.
Well, that, and there's other names too, like Wuzzy and all that. But when it came time to make a name, they stuck with Crash because he crashed into boxes, and they threatened to walk because they didn't want to use any of the other cutesy names. They wanted to stick with Crash, so that's how Crash got his name.
Yeah, pretty much. They thought that, if Naughty Dog wasn't going to get the permission to use Crash Bandicoot as the protagonist's name, then they were just going to quit the project altogether, and then the developers were like, okay, fine, you can use the name, whatever.
Yeah.
With Crash Bandicoot, there was a huge amount of risk, because remember that if you don't know the story between Sony and Nintendo, Sony was brought into Nintendo so they can be able to work on a CD add-on, because the Sega CD was one of the first that had the CD add-on, so they can be able to play with full motion video. And then eventually they broke off their deal, and Nintendo went over to Philips, and Sony was pretty angry about it, so they decided to create the PlayStation to compete against the Nintendo 64. They had a big, huge competition with Crash and Mario. I remember seeing that in the commercials, pretty much all the time, in which they wanted to showcase Crash as like the more teenagery, more extreme, more edgy 3D platformer, as opposed to Mario's family-friendly 3D platformer.
It's very much what Sega did with Sonic.
Yeah. Still remember that one commercial where they actually had the actor who played Crash go to Nintendo headquarters with a mic and start yelling.
Yeah, exactly. It was definitely a new competition that featured around that generation because Sega was already going downhill with the Dreamcast. And even though the Dreamcast was a fantastic console, unfortunately it could never stand a chance against all the other consoles that were coming out at that point.
It was too ahead of its time.
Exactly. So, yeah, when looking back on the original Crash Bandicoot, it's definitely a little bit more simpler than all the other games that would come out. It focused a lot on jungles, which, if we were to discuss about all the other franchises that started off with Naughty Dog, they always rely on jungles. But Crash Bandicoot was the first that did it. And to be quite honest, I did enjoy some of the music and some of the levels, but there were a lot of them that just weren't as good as the others, and some of the music I could also account for as the same. And the bosses were pretty easy.
Yeah, that's definitely true about the first one.
Yeah, the bosses are easy. Their attack patterns are predictable, so it's easy for you to counter their attacks and to judge when to attack them, because most oftentimes you either have to jump on them or spin attack them.
Hello? Tom, are you there?
Yes.
Oh, hey, Tom! Welcome. Welcome aboard to our discussion on Naughty Dog.
Glad to be here.
Well, while we're discussing about Crash Bandicoot, why don't you tell us about how you got into Naughty Dog?
Funny enough, it's pretty much what you guys are talking about at the moment. Is Crash Bandicoot 1 for the PlayStation 1.
Okay, that's cool. So, yeah, pretty much the same thing, in which we were all introduced to Naughty Dog by the same means, by Crash Bandicoot.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, we were just discussing about the first Crash Bandicoot game. Anything that you want to bring up regarding about the first one?
It was innovative for its time, and it took some risks, and it hasn't aged well to today's standards, but yet again, it was one of those finding games that trying to find its footing within the 3D world, playing or platforming.
Yeah, I definitely agree, Tom. So, and also, not to mention that with Crash Bandicoot, I think that it did try to do some really creative and innovative things, but I think because of the difficulty with not being able to control Crash with the analog stick as opposed to like the D-pad, in which they did at that point, it makes some jumping really difficult, some platforming harder than it needed to be, and I guess that's why many people considered the first game to be the worst in the original trilogy.
Yeah.
So, any other highlights that we want to say about the first game right before we move on to the sequel?
I know its code name when there was when they're building it, it was called Sonic's Ass Game.
Oh, yeah. I remember that one.
Because the camera was focused on Crash Bandicoot's pants, which were blue, which was the same colour of blue as Sonic the Hedgehog at the time.
Yeah, I remember. I think I remember that in Digital Game in which they were discussing about that was the original. That was like the original code name for the Crash Bandicoot game, the Sonic's Ass Game, because it was focusing on Crash's backside.
Yep.
I guess we can move on to the second one, which is 1 year after the first game came out. It was Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back. And if you follow us on the PlayStation Let's Play channel, we've already did a Let's Play on it. But for those who want a refresher on it, it takes place right after the first one. And apparently Dr. Neo Cortex is no longer evil. And he has to be able to collect crystals so they can be able to keep a certain planet from being destroyed. And this is actually the first time in which we were introduced to Crash's sister Coco. The first and only time in which she actually speaks in like the main games. Right before she becomes like a silent mute.
Yep. Well, the reason why they made Coco was because they didn't like Crash's girlfriend, which was modeled after Pamela Anderson.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, well, what do you have to say about Crash 2? So, let's start off with Klancy.
Well, I think it's interesting when you think of a lot of the elements that are very key to Crash Bandicoot. They come from this game, not the original. Like the going the main hub area, the warp zones to go to different spots, the crystals.
Yes, that is also true. It's, less Donkey Kong Country and more Super Mario 64.
But overall, I think it's a very great improvement over the first one. And for one, not every mission's in a jungle, thank goodness.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I love this game for numerous reasons, because of first off, they increased Crash's repertoire by including the crawl, the slide jump, the high jump, and also they kind of outdid themselves with secret areas where they increased the exploration of Crash Bandicoot 2 to where, there's certain things that are not supposed to be there in certain levels, so it made you want to search every nook and cranny for those secret items and gems. And the many different locations of Crash Bandicoot 2 were just astonishing, and it holds up to this time. And interesting enough, fun fact is that originally Crash Bandicoot 2 didn't have the analog control. It wasn't until the Greatest Hits or Platinum Edition in the UK that they included the analog control, because analog wasn't introduced until 1997.
Right. How about you, Tom?
With me, with Crash Bandicoot 2, I felt when I first played it, it improved everything from, again, when I first played it, I thought it was such an enjoyable, fun game. I felt it was a lot easier than the original game. It toned back the difficulty a bit in some aspects, but it improved it massively in all the different areas that need to be improved upon, like gameplay, graphics, the level structure and the physics, everything. They improved everything upon it. They learned from what was good from the first game, what wasn't, and just improved them on make a better game. I think the only downside to it was getting some of the hidden gems were a bit of a dig, but apart from that, it was such an enjoyable game.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, Tom, in which I did enjoy the game a lot. I think that one of the major problems, again, was what you said before, is that collecting the hidden crystals, those were so hard. Some of them, getting a 100% completion on Crash Bandicoot 2 is just... some of the stuff that you had to do was so difficult. Having to go back into various stages, having to complete certain tasks, having to be able to beat up your previous time in order for you to collect certain crystals was just so tedious and so annoying. That's why even to this day, I have not 100% completed Crash 2.
Yeah, because from that difficulty is because if you're going for 100% completion, you have to go in a set pattern so you can skip certain things to get certain collectibles before you go into a certain level.
Yeah, and another thing that I really enjoyed about the second one was the diversity of the stages. In the first game, you had mostly jungles, and I liked that in 2, you were able to have various things you had jungle levels, you had snow levels, you had water levels, you had the sewer levels, so I'm glad that they were able to definitely mix things up a bit and keep things from being redundant.
Well, that and all the levels are puns.
Yes, and all the levels are puns. And also another thing that I really liked about the second one was that the bosses were definitely much more of an improvement over the second game. They weren't as predictable with their movements, but they were still pretty easy. But I think that they were a tad bit more memorable.
Well, yeah, there's a couple of the bosses that make a return, like Ripperoo, and then they had the introduction to some new ones, like Tiny Tiger and the others. Yeah, exactly.
So, overall with Crash 2, would you highly recommend checking it out?
It's fun, it's challenging. For a veteran platform, you can beat it in a day. It'll only take you like a couple hours. So.
Right. What about the rest of you?
Yeah, I definitely would recommend checking this one out, especially if you're, say, of the current generation of consoles where platformers really don't exist anymore. This is a pretty fun one to check out.
Alright, how about you, Tom?
I think this is a good, if you want to try Crash out and you don't really want to play the first one, this is probably the best starting point to play any of the Crash games in general. To be honest, it's some people regard it as the best one, but it's a good solid platformer.
Alright. Now we can go over to the last one in the original trilogy, which is Crash Bandicoot Warped. And according to many of us here, this is the first game that we were introduced to when it comes to the Crash Bandicoot franchise. And once again, similar to Crash Bandicoot 2, we also played this on the PlayStation Let's Play channel. You can go check that out. And for this one, it takes place again right after Crash Bandicoot 2. And it involves with Dr. Cortex crashing on Earth and meeting up with Uka Uka, who is Aku Aku's brother. And they are planning on getting the crystal so they can be able to enslave the Earth. And it's up to Crash and Coco to save the day. And this is definitely much more of a huge improvement. I think that it was able to refine everything that they did in the first 2 games, and they were able to add in so much more. They were able to bring in various levels from all over the world. Crash was able to have some new moves, and Crash gets to use a bazooka. Awesome.
Plus, there's a lot more variety in this game compared to the other ones.
That is true, yes. It also has a lot more variety. So, what are your opinions on this game? Clancy?
I think this is the best out of all the Crash games, and I still think it's one of the best platformers in general. The boss fights are memorable. There's just some excellent level design. Honestly, my only complaint is that with Cortex, they repeat his boss battle twice. I kind of wish they did something different with him the second time, but other than that, this is just an amazing game.
Agreed. How about you, Tristen?
It's a really good game. Like I said, that they improved on everything. The only 2 gripes I had was the body slam. Even though they powered it up, it still was almost useless. It was basically situational, even though they tried to make that stronger than what it was in the second one. And the motorcycle races were frustrating the first time around.
Yeah, that was true. It was a bit frustrating in that time around. You would think that maybe they would be able to iron out the bits and pieces that they were able to do from the second game, but I guess with that, unfortunately, it was I felt that it was not as different, and it should have been because of all the improvements that they were able to do in the third one.
Again, I think this was the game that really nailed the formula of the Crash Bandicoot formula perfectly, and it was good. It was good enough as a challenge, but not to the point when you feel it was completely unfair. And it's good variety, had some good level textures. It's just an all-round good, solid game. And I went back and played it recently myself, and it still holds up. Still holds up as a good, solid platformer.
Yeah, I think that one of the great things about it is that it was able to control a lot better. The variety of the stages were really, really neat. And, there was a lot more things to collect, and the story was pretty interesting. So I think overall, this is definitely the best in the entire trilogy. And, while we continue on in this podcast, I can definitely understand why that Naughty Dog wanted to move on. I think that they couldn't be able to top the third one.
I think they possibly could, because I think now looking back on it, I think in short term they reckon they couldn't, but I think in long term they realised they could have now.
Well, they probably can, because people are asking them, they're saying they're open to it, but some legal things have to go first before they even try and do anything.
Yeah, because the Naughty Dog's contracted with Sony, and Sony trying to get the Crash rights back from Activision, and it's messy. It's such a messy situation.
Yeah, exactly. I guess we can talk about the last one, which is, of course, their spin-off series, which is Crash Team Racing. And, of course, just like all the other ones, we played this already on the PlayStation Let's Play channel, so you can go check it out. Definitely a little bit different than the games. I guess this was kind of like their attempt of trying to copy off Mario Kart 64 and Diddy Kong Racing, in which they were trying to cash in on the popularity of all the racing games that were going on. And you had all the Crash characters, and they were racing in various stages that were referenced from the levels from the previous games, and also had a little bit of a story behind it. So I haven't actually played this one in a very long time, so I can't really recall on it too much. So how about the rest of you? Clancy?
I've actually been trying to find this one at my local retro game shop, but I haven't had any luck finding it. I personally don't think it's quite as good as Mario Kart 64, but I think it's better than Diddy Kong. So overall, I think it's a pretty solid kart racer, though a funny thing about this is because of, for those who don't know at this time, Naughty Dog was not directly contracted to Sony. They had to work through, who was it, Universal?
Yeah, Universal.
Yeah, Universal.
Only at the time they didn't have the best relationship with Universal, so basically they worked on this game, and they had it like a third of the way done before they got permission to use Crash characters in the game.
Interesting. So, Tristen, since you were the one who played Crash Team Racing on the channel, on the PlayStation Let's Play channel, what did you think of it?
Well, I originally bought this game when I was a kid. I loved it. It's really good, and it's a great alternative to Mario Kart. And funny enough, for Diddy Kong Racing, they actually recreated one of the levels from Diddy Kong Racing to see if the PlayStation could handle those big areas like the Nintendo 64. And it did, but it's really good. The controls are really good for kart racer. For them making a kart racer, it's really good and tight. And the characters, they could have used some more iconic characters, even though there's some iconic characters, and there is some kind of bugs, like Penta Penguin is in the game, but Penta Penguin's a good guy, but it has the evil mask instead. Yeah, and some of the classic Crash Bandicoot bosses from the first, second, and third one are there as racers or boss races. So it's a good game.
Yeah. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, I enjoyed it when I first played it. I thought it was a very good kart racing game. It really was really good fun at the time, and it was even more fun if you could get friends to come around and play it with them and everything like that. And to be honest, I think it's one of the better kart racing game out there. That's the thing. I mean, I went back and played Mario 64 recently, and I personally thought it hasn't held up as well as some other stuff. But I have played Crash Team Racing again recently, and I thought it held it up really well. But I got my own favourite kart racer. But yeah, again, this probably was some people's first introduction to a kart racing game if you wasn't on the N64 side of things.
Right.
Yeah, and there was one special thing. There's one special thing about this, though. If you input a code, you unlock Storybook, and since this is Nightluck's last hurrah, they included a bunch of art and story concept art from all the games that they've done for Crash into the Storybook option.
Alright, so anything else we have to discuss about the Crash series right before we move on to the Jak and Daxter series?
It needs to come back.
Yes. We're hoping by some ways Naughty Dog can get the rights back to Crash Bandicoot and actually make something out of it, because, ever since Activision was able to get the rights to it, it became such a mediocre mess, and then eventually Crash Bandicoot pretty much just faded into obscurity. Now, unlike his competitor Spyro, in which he went off to do the Skylander series, nobody even knows about Crash anymore.
Well, Spyro had a shitload of failed games before going to Skylander.
That is true, yes.
Well, it did sort of peaked up when they did it with Elijah Woods. I think the first game was good, and then it went into obscurity towards the end of that new trilogy. And then it got pulled back with Skylanders, and then Skylanders was so popular on its own standards, it just dwarfed its whole thing and no longer needs Spyro to promote it. So what happened with Rayman with Raving Rabbids?
That is true, and then eventually the Rabbids faded into obscurity, and then Rayman started to come back.
Well, they had that really bad game for the Wii U launched.
Yeah, I know.
Raving Rabbids. I think that's probably the reason why the Rabbids have not been mentioned or heard from since.
Yeah, it's just too bad the Nickelodeon didn't get the memo when they did the Rabbids TV series. Yeah, I have to review it eventually. Anyway, so I guess we can go off to the next topic, which is Naughty Dog's next franchise that they decided to work on, which is the Jak and Daxter franchise. This was their attempt of trying to be similar to Banjo-Kazooie. So, would you guys like to say about how you guys got introduced to the Jak and Daxter franchise? Clancy.
Well, when I bought my PlayStation 2, it came with the first Jak and Daxter game. And this, I'll be honest, this series is my favorite video game series out there, so I have a lot of good things to say about it.
Alright, great. How about you, Tristen? Alright, so Tristen, how did you get introduced to the Jak and Daxter?
Again, I was at my cousin's house. He had a PlayStation 2 before me. He had the game. I saw Naughty Dog's logo on it, so I popped in. He said, "Oh, that's a great game." So I played like an hour, and I liked it.
All right, Tom.
Again, I think I just saw it one day, and I saw it was made by the same people who made Crash Bandicoot on the shelves, and I heard stuff about it, and again, I was a huge fan of platformers back then, and sure enough, it piqued my interest, and I picked it up, and I liked it a lot. I really did like the first Jak and Daxter game, but yeah, again, I'll speak about the later ones when we talk about them, but I thought it was a good, solid game. This was, funny enough, out of all the Jak and Daxter game, this is the only Jak and Daxter game I have not beaten.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It'll definitely be interesting.
Yeah, seriously, yeah. I know, yeah.
Alright, how I got introduced to the Jak and Daxter series was that I received the PlayStation 2, and it came with a copy of Jak and Daxter and the first Ratchet and Clank. So I was able to play them both at the same time, and while they were both platformers, they were both different. And then later on, I started playing all the other games into the series, but we'll talk about the first one. So for those who don't know, Jak and Daxter, the Precursor Legacy, is about Jak and his best friend Daxter, who live in a small village called Sandover Village. And one day they decide to wander around into a mysterious, forbidden island known as Misty Island, where they saw these, our villains, or Gaul and Maya, talking about that they wanted to take Dark Eco and flood the entire world with it. That way they can have control over it. And then eventually Daxter accidentally fell down into the big puddle of Dark Eco, but instead of killing him, which ordinarily Dark Eco is supposed to kill you, it turns him into an Ottsel, which is a combination of an otter and a weasel. And then later on, Samos the Sage finds out about this, and in order for them to be able to have Daxter turn back, he has to see Golacaron, the Dark Eco Sage, so they can change him back. And along the way, you do various missions to collect power cells, so you can be able to go over to the various sages and meet up with them, and then an interesting story unfolds, but I'm not going to spoil it too much here. So going into from Crash Bandicoot to Jak and Daxter is definitely very different. Very wide, non-linear platforming, collecting items, going over to various places, and there's no hub world involved. And I think, and once again, similar to the first Crash Bandicoot game, it's all involving with jungles. So, what are your experiences on the first Jak and Daxter game?
Well, one of the first things that really stood out to me was there's no load screens in this game. I'm not sure if this was the first game to ever not include load screens, but it's the first one that I ever played, which back then that was just amazing to me. But I think it's a really fun platformer. I liked how you could basically from the start go wherever you wanted. Everything was connected. Plus, I thought Daxter was absolutely hilarious, so that was a total bonus for me.
Yeah. How about you, Tristen?
I loved it. I don't play as much as the other two, but I loved it for how it set the foundation for the actual trilogy. And what got me most was the Naughty Dog's take on the artwork. You can see the surrounding area, the vibrant colors and whatnot at different area locations. And plus, it was kind of offsetting to me to have a silent protagonist that much, where he didn't really say anything, not even yelling or screaming if he died, but Daxter made up for that with with his over the top antics, and when you died, he kind of berated you when you died.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought it was overall good, enjoyable game. It mixed up the elements quite well. It was an interesting story for the most part from what I saw and played of it, and what I found out what happens in the end. But yeah, it was overall good, solid game, and it really stood the test of times when it came to it. Even when they re-released it on the HD collection, it still plays pretty well.
Yeah, definitely. I think that out of all of the Jak and Daxter games, in my opinion, Jak and Daxter, the Precursor Legacy, is the one that, while at the same time it's definitely very different than all the other games that would come out afterwards. In my opinion, it's kind of interesting how it was able to do the collectathon similar to Banjo-Kazooie, because I didn't play Banjo-Kazooie until much later on, because I didn't know anybody who owned a Nintendo 64. I knew a lot of people who owned the PlayStation, so when I first played Jak and Daxter: The Precursor Legacy, I was able to experience wandering around in a non-linear platform collecting things for the first time. I didn't get into like all the other Nintendo 64 3D platformers that did that concept until much later on. So seeing this kind of gameplay was so different to me, and it's very enjoyable. I feel like sometimes the controls are a little bit floaty, especially when driving around the zoomer. And also, another thing is that sometimes collecting the precursor orbs and the power cells can, for the most part, be a little bit redundant. But overall, with the experience, I thought it was very enjoyable. Definitely a really unique, charming game for the PS2 that, unfortunately, this genre of games are pretty much dead. Unless you want to go for the indie games that want to try to capture nostalgia and doing like retro games, but for the most part, mainstream games like this are kind of no longer around.
And even with the indie games, you don't get the big open worlds like you have with this. You more of get 2D platformers like original Super Mario Brothers style.
That is true, yeah. Similar to games such as, Super Meat Boy and Shovel Knight don't kind of get the huge explorative worlds like Banjo-Kazooie or Conker's Bad Fur Day or Jak and Daxter does. So in order for you to be able to play this, you need to be able to play the older games from like 10 or 15 years ago. For all the kids who are playing the current generation of games and you want something a little bit more different, I think that the Precursor Legacy is an excellent place to start. I guess we can move on to the next one, which is Jak 2, and oh man, when I first saw the trailer to Jak 2, I thought to myself, is this the same game from the original? Because it is so much more darker and serious.
This is probably the biggest tonal shift there has ever been between sequels of any video game.
It takes place right after the first game ended, and if you 100% completed Jak and Daxter: The Precursor Legacy, they actually find an artifact that they take with them. And this artifact, it's kind of like a time machine in which they are able to travel far into the future, and they land in a city called Haven City. Jak is taken into prison with dark eco-experiments. He stays there for 2 years, and then eventually Daxter comes and saves him. And there are 3 major plot points that are happening in Jak 2. The first one is that Jak wants to get revenge on Baron Praxis, who was the one who started on the dark eco-experiments. The second one involves with the Metalhead leader, who wants to be able to take down Haven City. And then the third plot, it involves with Jak and Daxter trying to be able to find a way so they can get back to their own original time period and back home to Sandover Village. So, yeah, I gotta say that this was completely different. It was much more darker. It was less of a non-linear platformer game and more of one of those sandbox games similar to Grand Theft Auto. It was really different, and for me, it actually kind of worked. I really enjoyed this one.
This was probably my favourite one out of the franchise, to be honest. I really did like it. I liked the whole dystopia apocalyptic theme of it. I thought it took a right step in the right direction, because I think it was around that point, just after the first Jak and Daxter game, it took a step in the right direction because it needed to go a little bit darker. Otherwise, it was going to get buried under all these other games that were coming out around that time, which were, at that time in the early noughties for a video game, were a lot more grittier and a lot darker in places. And again, this was Naughty Dog's first game, I think, under the title Naughty Dog, that got a rating higher than For Everyone as well. Yeah. And I like that they indicate it with when you see Jak, because in the first game Jak doesn't speak at all. He's a silent protagonist, and then the first words that come out of his mouth when Dex released him, he said, I'm going to kill him," and it's just like, okay, you're definitely anti up here. I'm curious where this is going to go.
Yeah, I think the change in tone was definitely something that could have easily backfired for Naughty Dog. But I think it definitely worked out for them. And really, considering what Naughty Dog's known for now, they're really good storytelling with great gameplay. This is really where they got their start with that. So it's a really important game when you just look at the history of Naughty Dog.
Yeah, I guess you could say that because, in previous games, while, they had their dark moments, they were mostly happy and colorful with bright games that were mostly just platformers. And with them mixing up two different genres of platforming and putting a little bit of sandbox in there, it was able to broaden out towards a huge demographic.
Oh, I love this game. I saw the trailers and stuff, and like Tom said that those first lines that Jak said when he got free, which kind of put me off. Okay, this is going to be a little bit more serious than the first one, and they kind of upped the ante for the greater storytelling, and they added gunplay, which you have the morph gun with the different mods, and then they also added the dark eco transformation, which helped out with the platforming and the fights. And Daxter and Jak still have that, brothers, because they played off each other really, really well, and some of the jokes were really funny. And oddly enough, they Insomniac and Naughty Dog had this little fun back and forth thing with each of the games. If you let it, when you see the press start screen, if you let it idle for a couple of minutes, they'll either start playing or watching each other's games at a time, which is pretty cool. Nod to each other.
Yeah,
overall, it's a really good game.
Yeah, wasn't in Jak 2 they had a poster for the Ratchet game that was out at the time?
Yes, they did. If you go into Haven City, there is a poster of Ratchet and Clank going commando. And if you've played Ratchet and Clank going commando, then when Ratchet and Clank complete a mission, Clank actually dances like Daxter. So yeah, they did play each other a lot.
Yeah, that was pretty fun Easter egg, because Ratchet goes, "What are you doing?"
I think one of the best things about Jak 2 was the story. The story was amazing in Jak 2. I think that this is where, Naughty Dog was able to become really excellent storytellers. Not that the other stories were bad, but it just felt like they were very simple and straightforward. But with Jak 2, I felt that the story was much more serious, and it had a lot more tension going on. It was very risky, and I was able to appreciate that a lot more in a time in which storytelling was becoming very important in video games. I think the one thing that many people still are frustrated about Jak 2 to this day is the difficulty. It's definitely one of the most difficult games that has ever come out.
Yeah, I can see that, because some of the boss battles are extremely difficult, to where you gotta balance out when you're gonna use your morph gun to when you can use the dark eco transformation. It kind of gets frustrating after a while.
Yes, exactly.
There's definitely a very steep learning curve. I don't think it's unfair, but it's just, you gotta know what you're doing.
There's a ton of trial and error when it comes to Jak 2. Like, the level that frustrated the hell out of me was the level in which Bruder gives you the precursor piece that you need so you can be able to head over. Yes, I know. And then when you finally grabbed it, there's a whole bunch of Crimson Guards after you, and you have to be able to leave that part of the slums alive without getting killed. And that means that there's going to be no hover cars. Using the jet board is going to make you fall into the water, and there's already a turret down there, so you have to be able to fight through so many Crimson Guards and their ships, and it is so ridiculous. I must have died like 30 times the first time I played that.
Oh, yeah, I remember that part. I hated that part.
Yeah. The two things I got annoyed with the game, which I found really annoying, was there was one mission. It was a very early on mission. It's when you have to run away from a tank, but you see it from the tank point of view.
Yeah.
And the other one the ones I don't like is the circuit racing challenges, when you have to ride on that little bike and you have to do the races inside the stadium. Apart from that, I have no problem with the game's missions.
I guess to each his own, The racing missions were also really difficult.
Yeah.
The vehicles are very floaty in that. I just got done replaying it. I didn't remember the vehicles being that floaty, but yeah, they're pretty bad.
Yeah. And also, I really like the twist ending, for those who don't know about Jak's true origins. We'll definitely dive more into that in Jak 3, but I think they were able to give a little bit more twists and turns that I didn't feel that the first one had. So, If any of you guys are interested in playing Jak 2, I would highly recommend that you check it out. Just be careful with its difficulty. Okay, so the next one in the series, which was the final one in the Jak and Daxter trilogy, which is Jak 3. And this was definitely, out of all of them, the most improved out of the series, since it was able to fix all the problems from Jak 2 and able to balance itself out with a mixture of two different cities, Spargus and Haven, while at the same time give us some new gameplay. You had the racing, of course, you had hunting down the metalheads, you had the dark markers, which were these alien creatures that were integrated into the storyline. You had some new characters. So the story is about that Jak gets banished into the wasteland after the problems from Jak 2, since they were constantly blaming him and crew for it. And then along the way, he is found by Damus, who is the king of Spargus City, and he has to prove himself in order to be a part of Spargus City. And he does various tasks along the way so he can become a wastelander. So what is your opinions on this installment, Klancy?
Well, personally speaking, Jak 3 is my favorite video game ever. I personally think that there's a lot of games that master one particular area, but Jak 3 seems to be the one that has the most variety of any game you can probably find out there. There's combat vehicles, there's racing, there's platforming, there's still some puzzle elements in it. It's just, and it's good in every single aspect of this. Normally with a game like this, there's like one or two aspects that it's kind of lacking in, but this one they nailed every single part. Not to mention that the characters are great, the stories are great. When you finally find out who the precursors are, it's easily one of the funniest moments in video game history.
Yeah, we're not going to spoil it here, but let's just say it is super hilarious once you find out that the precursors, who were like the gods of the entire game and giving you the eco powers, they're not exactly as godly as they perceive to be. But other than that, I think that it's really interesting with the story. A lot of people say that it's not as good of storytelling as Jak 2, but I think it's really nice of how it continues. And also another thing that I really like is that, in a way, it kind of concludes the series, but at the same time, it kind of feels a little bit more open, like they could have made more stories out of it. What do you think?
Yeah, there's definitely, it closes out the trilogy because Daxter finally gets his pants, is another real funny side note from it. Mm-hmm. Not really a spoiler, but it also leaves it open, and I recently picked up the artwork book from 30 Years in Naughty Dog, and they include concept art of some sequels that they started working on at various times, just they canceled it for various reasons.
They were actually considering on doing a reboot to the Jak and Daxter franchise, but it started becoming much more realistic and gritty, and then eventually they took those ideas and they implemented in The Last of Us. They were showing that in a presentation, I think, a couple of months ago, and I thought that would be... I mean, I saw the illustrations, and they kind of looked a little weird. I don't know, did you hear about that presentation?
Well, I've heard various things on whether or not it was going to be a reboot or a sequel. In the art book, they have it labeled as Jak 4. But how would I describe the concept that they described? It's kind of the reverse of what Wind Waker did. Where in Wind Waker it turned it to a more cartoony art style, this would have turned it to a more realistic looking one.
What are your opinions on it?
It's hard to say without actually playing the game. There's some cool concept art. I really don't know if you could have a modern day platformer that still had the kind of cartoony look and still have it be a major hit. But on the other hand, I do like the cartoony look that the Jak and Daxter games have, so maybe they could have pulled it off. It's Naughty Dog, so I'm sure they could have, but as the game developer said, the further they got into it, the more they realized this isn't really Jak and Daxter's.
Exactly, especially since the people who created Naughty Dog, they left afterwards.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know how they were going to pull it off if they ever did a Jak 4, but it would have been really interesting. I mean, many people still want to see more sequels of it as opposed to Uncharted.
Yeah, I'd love to see another Jak and Daxter. I mean, I understand why they're doing Uncharted as opposed to another Jak and Daxter because, well, platformers aren't as popular as they used to be.
Well, that's true, but given the fact that Ratchet and Clank is still really popular, I mean, they're getting a movie, and, you know, Sly Cooper 4 became really big, and that's getting a movie, so I wouldn't see the reason why they shouldn't do a Jak and Daxter game.
Yeah, I agree.
And also another thing that, that kind of left me a little bit itsy about it. I mean, this is going to be minor spoilers, but if you remember from the first Jak and Daxter game, there was somebody who was simply known as the Explorer, but he was known as Jack's uncle. And then when you see a statue of Jak 2, in which the character Mar, who was the founder of Haven City and who was like the one who stopped the Metalhead War. And then you find out in Jak 3 that Jak is Mar, or at least he's either a descendant of Mar, or he might be Mar himself, because there's time travel in Jak 3. It kind of makes you wonder, is the Explorer from Jak 1 really an older Jak that came back to the past? Or it never really gives an explanation. Does it say anything about it in the book?
Not in the book, but I did read an interview where when they made the characters in Jak 1, they weren't planning Jak 2 yet. So they just named one character his uncle, and then when they wrote the story for the sequel, they realized, oh, we had an uncle character, and they purposely never referenced him again. Although that is an interesting theory that he could, in fact, be Jak himself.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of looks like Mar, at least an older version of Mar. If you ever see the statue of Jak 2 in the mission in which they go into the sewer so they can be able to find the heart of Mar, which is like this jewel. If you take a look at the face, it kind of looks like the Explorer, but much, younger. So I'm thinking to myself, since there was a lot of time travel discussion in the third game, in which, he used to travel back and forth in time, and then maybe it was the same time machine that Samos and Kira found in the end of the first one, and maybe Mar used that, and he probably used it for, numerous times over the years so they can be able to stop the metalheads, and maybe he wanted, his younger self to find it so he can be able to, bring time, stabilize. So it could be an interesting theory.
Yes. It's all wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
Oh, goody. We're gonna bring Doctor Who into this. Why not? Anyway, so, yeah, anything more to say about Jak 3 or before we move on?
No, I think that's about it.
Alright, so the next game we can discuss about is Jak X Combat Racing. Definitely very interesting since Jak 2 and Jak 3 were able to focus a lot on some racing elements. So this one takes place right after Jak 3. It involves with Jak and Daxter entering a racing competition. After that, they were poisoned by Crew after the reading of Crew's will by Crew's daughter Rain. And they have to be able to win the race so they can be able to get the antidote. Then there's a little bit of a side story with this racing crime lord by the name of Mizo. So we have all the racers competing for various reasons. And with this game, well, I haven't played Crash Team Racing in a while, but I do recall that it was definitely that Jak X was definitely a lot more fun, in my opinion. What are your opinions on it, Klancy?
I think it's a real fun spin-off. A funny story about this game is that they only made it because they needed something to work on between finishing Jak 3 and getting the PS3 development kit. So this game was actually just so they could kill some time.
Well, an interesting way of killing time, in my opinion. How about you, Tristen?
Yes.
It's different. It's fun. They added a whole bunch of content, like you can build your own car, and they also, instead of just the regular races, they also have the car death matches where you're in the arena and it's just last car standing. And they also add some secrets. If you had saved data from Jak 1, 2, or 3, you unlock some secret characters and some secret cars into Jak X. And it's a fun story because one of the funniest lines that I remember that I loved in Jak X is when you get introduced to Crew's daughter, Daxter goes, "That made that?" It just cracked me up when he said that.
Yeah, and also there's another interesting twist ending regarding about the story that we're not going to spoil, but let's just say that, it's definitely very shocking. Although I don't think not as shocking as 2 and 3's twist endings, but it's definitely really interesting. And it's not every day that you get to hear a really complex storyline in racing games. So if you're looking for a fun racing game that is not Mario Kart, then I highly recommend that you check this one out. Alright, anything else we have to say about the Jak and Daxter franchise right before we go to the next one?
I wish they'd make another one. They actually started working on another Jak twice. This one ended up a different studio took over, and it turned into the very disappointment that was Lost Frontier.
Oh yes, Lost Frontier. I still am crying about Lost Frontier because it could have been so much more. And it just... I'm not going to discuss about it because it was not made by Naughty Dog, but let's just say that I remember being really looking forward to that game, and then I just was disappointed at the end. So let's just move on to the next one, which is the next franchise that pretty much everybody is associated with when it comes to Naughty Dog, and that is none other than the Uncharted franchise, starting off with Uncharted Drake's Fortune, and once again taking place in a jungle. Not surprising there. So it involves with...
You could make a Naughty Dog drinking game out of every time they have a game in the jungle.
Yeah, exactly. Take a shot every time they're in the jungle. Your liver will go out in the next 10 shots. Anyway, so this one, it takes place in the jungle, of course, and it involves with Nathan Drake and Elena Fisher looking for the sarcophagus of his ancestor, Sir Francis Drake, looking for information about El Dorado. And with this one, it's actually really interesting about how they're able to portray El Dorado, because it's not a city of gold, it's actually a giant statue. And there's a lot of dark secrets involving with this statue. This one is definitely very different than Crash Bandicoot or Jak and Daxter, because it is somewhat of a platformer, but it's more like an adventure game with shooting and puzzles. So, Clancy, why don't you start off of how you got introduced to the Uncharted games?
Well, how I got introduced is I didn't get a PS3 right away, so by the time I got one, the first two Uncharted's were already out, and I had always heard that they're just amazing games, so when I was buying games, I picked them up.
First time was actually because, most people couldn't afford a PlayStation 3 when it came out, so I kind of waited till, I think prior to one and the second one, and then that's where it picked up.
Alright, well, in my opinion, with the first Uncharted, I thought it was okay. I mean, it was pretty cool, and I did like the story, but I didn't really think too much of it. I mean, I did see the praise that it got, but I didn't really... I mean, I remember this was actually the first game that I did pick up on the PS3, but when I finished playing with it, I just thought it was pretty decent enough. I didn't think it was great, though. I mean, I did enjoy some parts of the levels. I did really enjoy the opening theme, and some of the weapons were okay. The only thing that I do remember that was a little bit frustrating was that it took a little bit too many shots to kill the enemies. Even the weaker enemies was a little bit frustrating, and I think the only thing that I really was impressed with it were the graphics, about how huge that all the other... the levels were, that they were able to become up to scale, and I liked the way it was able to split up into many chapters. And the final boss in the game was really disappointing, and it was really lackluster, so overall, I just thought that the first Uncharted is okay. Nothing much to say about it, I just found it to be okay.
That's the consensus. It's okay. It is
It's kind of like the first Crash Bandicoot.
Yeah, I guess, but then again, the first Crash Bandicoot, while it was trying to be like a follow-up to Super Mario 64 and do something different, with the first Uncharted, I just felt like it was trying to be like Tomb Raider, and it was just okay. I mean, there was nothing really special about it. But the sequel, on the other hand, Uncharted 2, was when I started to get really interested.
Yeah, they built upon the first one by miles. It's really
definitely.
Good. And the reason why is because they made it cinematic, like you're playing an Indiana Jones movie. That's what it was, because when I usually play an Uncharted game and I have family over, they start watching, they think it's a movie, and then they see me pause it and they go, what's going on? I'm like, it's a game. They go, really? This is a game? I say, yeah, it is.
Exactly, and I also love the story involved with Shangri-La, and also it had a much more menacing villain, although not as memorable as all the other villains that were featured in previous Naughty Dog games, but definitely a lot more menacing. In your opinions, what were some of the most memorable things about Uncharted 2? Clancy?
The train sequence, definitely the train sequence.
Yeah, definitely. I remember seeing that so many times in the trailers, as well as the scene in which Drake and Chloe were being chased around the buildings, and then eventually the building just collapses and falls down. That was also another one of my favorite scenes as well in the game.
Yeah, that is awesome too. Or even just how it opens, just the whole holy shit, this is awesome opening that they had there.
Yeah, agreed. In which it starts off with Nathan Drake sitting down on the train on its side, hurt with blood, and you're wondering, what is going on here? And, trying to slowly get yourself out of the train because he's injured, and then eventually just falls down and he's wandering around in the snow. And then it, continues on with various parts in the story. And what I like about it is that it doesn't have to do with jungles as much. It takes place in various locations, and that's what I really liked about it. It was different, it had variety. It was similar to Crash 2 and Jak 2, which did involve with jungles. Yay!
Well, my favorite section it's also the train section, because I like how Naughty Dog made Nathan Drake not some kind of hero, but an everyman. Because there are those moments where you'll speak out loud and Drake's speaking exactly the same thing, like with the train sequence where you're running from the attack chopper and you're wondering how the hell you're supposed to deal with this, and then Drake says, "How the hello?" Because he sees the anti-air tank. So you get into the gunship, and you have a gun battle against the attack chopper on the train.
I think they were able to elevate it with so many things in the second one, because, well, it did play for the most part similar to the first one, in which it had the puzzles and the fighting and all that stuff. But I think that the variety and the refinement of all the, bits and pieces that they were able to do was what makes many people think that Uncharted 2 was one of the best games that came out on the PlayStation 3. That is until The Last of Us came out, and we'll discuss more about that later on. But I think one of the best things about Uncharted 2, besides all that, was that I really enjoyed the story, and I enjoyed the new characters that were being introduced into the game. Definitely a lot more memorable than the first game, which, I just still found to be okay, but really, really enjoyable. And I can see why many people would consider Uncharted 2 to be the best in the trilogy.
I personally think it is.
Yeah, because when we get to 3, I'll touch upon some of the things that kind of, they misstep because they didn't finish what the story that was supposed to be told, in my opinion.
Yeah, I guess so. Anything else we have to discuss about Uncharted 2 right before we go on to 3?
There's some Easter eggs. There's to some of the other games, like the precursor orb you can collect in one of the levels.
Yeah, and
you can actually do that in all 3 of the Uncharted games.
Yeah, that's right. You can do that in all 3 Uncharted games, and that's actually pretty neat, in which you are able to find the precursor orb in all the Uncharted games. It's a nice little touch. But also not to mention that it had a really great multiplayer in Uncharted 2. I remember when I first played it, I was so addicted to it, even more so than any first-person shooter I've ever played. Everybody was getting into Call of Duty 4. I was getting into Uncharted 2.
Yeah, with that is their first. I think it was their first forte into online multiplayer with Naughty Dog, and it was pretty unique because you had all the game mechanics. You can climb, you can jump, and basically added that whole new element to your advantages. And if you had the higher ground, you could overlay the whole entire area of the map and relate to your teammates if they had mics to where the enemies were, and you can strategically strategize where you want to go on the map.
Alright, now we can talk about Uncharted 3. In many people's opinion, some people say that Uncharted 3 is the worst in the trilogy. I don't think so. I don't think it's that bad. I just think that it's pretty... it's okay. I mean, it's not as okay as the first one, but I think because of Uncharted 2 stepping it up to the next level, Uncharted 3 just feels a little bit of a letdown.
For the most part, most people just say it almost reached that point, but it felt flat because there's some elements of the story that don't get resolved in 3.
So mostly it focuses on Drake and Sully, and it involves with a treasure in the desert, the one that Lawrence of Arabia was trying to discover. And we get a little bit more backstory regarding about Drake's past, and it turns out that he was an orphan when he was very young, and he's not the descendant of Sir Francis Drake. And this is where we first get introduced to how Sully met, and then we get introduced to another villain who's part of this really long, centuries-old kind of cult group. Well, just like the first one, I just found it to be okay. I mean, it wasn't that interesting. I guess maybe because that both of the antagonists from the first and third game were so old, they really couldn't do anything except get their henchmen. And then later on you find out, oh, they were not the main villain all along, blah, 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 whatever. But I don't know. I mean, and, just like in the next one, they try to bring a little bit more variety into the locations, and then, it focuses a little bit about some cities, and then some jungles, and then most of the parts is in the desert, but for the most part, I just thought it was a pretty interesting game. I did really like the part in which Drake is dangling around the train, not the plane, and then there was one in which Drake is trying to get off of the sinking ship. I thought that was really cool. There are a couple of, and also, when Drake is riding on the horse and he's, into the desert, I thought those were really cool moments, but for the most part, they're just nowhere as wow as the second one.
I agree. It's a good game. I just don't think it quite reaches the level that Uncharted 2 reached. It tries to reach that part, but it falls a little flat, so I think it's better than the first Uncharted, but not near as good as the second one.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's not as bad as everybody makes it out to be, but it's just when you have something so grand as the second one, it just makes the third one a little bit of a letdown. You would think that they would up the ante just like they did with, Crash Bandicoot Warped and Jak 3.
Yeah. Well, I don't really agree with people who think it's a bad game at all because the mechanics are all sound. It still has there's issues with the story, but it's not a terrible story.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's just that interesting enough, the hand-to-hand combat is Naughty Dog got it to what they wanted it to be in the first game that they couldn't do it because they didn't know how to use the dev kit all too well. But where they say it falls flat is with the story because by the second half of the story, I didn't really care that much about the implications to what the treasure really was. I wanted to know who Drake really was, but you never got that.
They did focus a little bit about Drake's backstory in Uncharted 3, even though that Elena even mentioned in the first game that Sir Francis Drake never had children. But you kind of still wondered about how he was descended from him, but it turns out he wasn't. He was just an orphan who was raised in an orphanage in Colombia, and then eventually he ran away at a very young age, and he wanted to get a hold of Sir Francis Drake's ring that we see him constantly wearing. It would be really nice if we can get more and deeper into his story, but in a way we never got that. We just mostly got focused on the treasure.
Yeah. Maybe with Uncharted 4, that's coming out.
Yeah, let's hope so. Alright, anything to say about Uncharted 3 right before we move on?
It's good that they try to use different locales, especially they made an emphasis on the sand, which they really got. That part I kind of like, just wandering through the desert, but overall it's a good game.
Yeah, another thing that I really like was the mechanics that they were able to work on each game. In the first one, I love the water. It was the first time in any video game that I saw water so realistic. And then when I saw, Nathan being completely wet and still soaking around in the lighting, it was just amazing. And then the second game, it involved with the snow. When you reached over to Nepal and you saw, the snow dripping around him and the snow covering his legs. I thought that was so cool. And then the third one, you had the desert, in which it reacted so realistically. You get to see, the little grains in the sand. I thought that was really neat. If there's one thing I give the Uncharted series a lot of credit, is that they were able to do those mechanics very well. And each of the stories were really well written by Amy Hennig, who worked on Naughty Dog for a long time. And then, eventually she moved on to another company, which I wish her the best of luck, because she did an amazing job with the Uncharted trilogy.
Oh yeah, she's an extremely talented writer.
Yeah, I agree. Alright, now we can get to the most recent game that Naughty Dog released, and it is none other than The Last of Us. Wow. I gotta say, just wow. I mean, we did a Let's Play of it on, the PlayStation Let's Play channel, and if you recall the hashtag DemFeels2014, this is the game we're talking about. So, The Last of Us. It involves with a really interesting disease that is kind of similar to the cordyceps disease that affects insects. It takes over your mind. Eventually you grow fungus around your entire body and turns you into a zombie. And for unknown reason, it starts to affect people. And you have the main character, Joel, in which, it starts affecting, his town. And then eventually, his child gets shot and he starts becoming a much more bitter man. And then 20 years go by and he starts trying to survive alongside with his partner Tess. Then you meet up with the little girl Ellie, who was actually bitten by one of the creatures, and she was never affected by it. And they said that she could that there's a possibility of finding a cure. and then they take her over to the rebellious group known as the Fireflies, and you start traveling into various places, get to explore and get to find out more bits and pieces about what happened to the people who are affected, and that this is definitely one of the darkest games I've ever played, and I think, in my opinion, out of all the Naughty Dogs that came out, this is definitely the best well-written story. It's just so interesting.
Yeah, they're also their first forte into survival horror, and their first M-rated game.
That's right, yeah. A lot of people have given it so much praise, and you can definitely see why. The one thing that I really like about Naughty Dog games is that they're able to take in stuff that has already been done before, give it a new twist, and create something so unique and different. And with The Last of Us, it's a prime example. We've seen survival horror games before with Resident Evil and Silent Hill and Dead Space, but never into this degree. And in a time when zombie games have become so infested with like the Left 4 Dead series and Call of Duty Zombies, it's nice that they're able to take a really interesting twist into it, especially one that is covered with so much emotion.
Yeah, basically the whole premise of the game was the story driven around the characters themselves and what they've been through and what they have to go through to reach that final decision that Joel makes, which is kind of messed up.
Yeah, it is kind of messed up. We're not going to spoil what the ending is, but wow, it's really, when you think about it, it's really screwed up. What are your opinions on it, Clancy?
Well, I pre-ordered this game because at this point I'll just pre-order anything Naughty Dog works on. They have just such a good reputation at this point. So I was expecting it to be good. I was not expecting it to be anywhere near the level of that we got.
How about you, Tristen?
Yeah, me too. I pre-ordered this game. I knew saw Naughty Dog. I knew it was gonna be good. I didn't know it was gonna be the best that it really actually was. Because if you want to talk about accolades and awards, Skyrim held the record still at this point to last year. But I think like 228 or 29 Game of the Year awards. The Last of Us broke that record by getting 235 Game of the Year awards.
Yeah, that just goes to show you how powerful it is.
Yeah, and with the story, I loved it. There's the infected were scary, and it made you not want to interact with them as much because there were tense moments to where you did not want to fight them because of how the emphasis on how they said that guns don't really work on them. So if you can sneak by them, if you can.
Yeah, exactly. Unlike the Jak and Daxter series and the Uncharted series, you're very limited to ammo and very limited to supplies. You have to plan yourself very smart in order for you to get through the game. You can be able to wander off into various houses and buildings and try to see if you can find as much items as you can, but you can only carry so much. And you have to be smart enough to, if you want to need a first aid kit or a Molotov cocktail, and, how many bullets you want to be able to waste on a particular creature right before you run out, and then you have to be able to maybe use a 2x4 with some nails or a bat. You have to plan very smart with this, and I think that I think a lot of people are missing that because, with recent survival horror games in which they give you just too much ammo and too many weapons, and, I think that something like The Last of Us is able to play it in a very interesting way, in which it relies on you to be a true survivor.
Yeah, and then it also made you, when you're searching throughout the environment, they sprinkled little notes and things from the actual world that gives you more insight to what actually happened within those 20 years, and also some of the written notes to characters to each other, and you figure out what people were going through and how sad and messed up this world became in 20 years.
That was one of my favorite parts of the game, just finding the stories of people you don't even see, particularly in the sewer level.
Oh yeah, the sewer level was wow. Yeah.
Yeah, the sewer levels was because there's a little colony that survived as long as they have, and that there's this one dude that they met and they started talking and exchanging supplies, and he kind of just fucks them over, and they all get infected, and that's how that story pertains. That you find out with the notes and stuff inside the sewer and outside the sewer when you guys go in there.
Yeah, exactly. And also, not to mention that a lot of people had a bit of mixed reactions with Ellie when the game was first featured, in which Ellie was in the front of the cover and Joel was kind of like in the background. A lot of developers were like, why'd you have to have her in the foreground? I mean, she's not even the main character, and that's
She kind of is.
I know, she kind of is, but I guess, because they didn't think that females were important to video games, I think that's a kind of ass-backwards way of thinking, which I think is stupid, but...
Well, I think it's part that. It's also that there's a terrible reputation of non-playable characters in games.
Yes, that is true. Well, we're looking at you, Resident Evil.
Well, the thing is that partway through the game, you actually play as Ellie.
That's true. And unlike a certain president's daughter in RE4, Ellie, while she is a bit annoying at first, you actually grow to know her more, and she becomes much more of an interesting person, especially since she didn't grow up at a time in which there was no, virus going around. So she actually had to go through that.
Yeah, and she is kind of a scrapper because she can save Joel quite a number of times with that knife she has, and she can't shank a person.
That is true, yes.
Yeah.
There's, I don't really want to spoil it too much, so I don't think there's really much to say about The Last of Us, other than if you haven't played it, then I highly recommend that you check it out. It's an amazing game. If you want to play the PS3 version or the remastered version, go ahead, whichever one is fine.
Well, yeah, there's something that I will say is that you think Joel gets the boss fight, it's actually Ellie that gets the boss fight. That's
exactly.
all I say.
Yeah. Alright, I guess that's pretty much it, since Uncharted 4 hasn't come out yet. I guess we can briefly discuss about what we're expecting from that game. So it takes place a few years after Uncharted 3. Nathan has quit being a thief, and we don't know if he settled down and married with Elena, but he's going back...
We know they are married because of the third game.
Yes, that is true. But, yeah, it involves with Nathan going back to his thieving ways, and, yeah, there's really not much information about that was featured in the trailer, but it should be interesting. What kind of things would you like to see in the fourth one?
Well, the one of the early trailers, it suggests that there was somebody that Drake kind of crossed, and that's the whole thing, and some people theorize it has something to do with pirates.
Interesting.
And also with the timescape, you see that there's some gray coming out of Drake's beard, so time really has passed, and that it's supposed to be one of his last hurrahs with Sully, because Sully says that I'm getting too old for this. So is this really what you want to do? And this is what it is. But I want to see more locales, if they can, do more globe-trotting from one location to another to see what they really can do on the PlayStation 4 from the remastered version of The Last of Us.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, definitely. This will be the first one in the Uncharted series in which Amy Hennig is not the writer of the game, so I'm interested to see about how they're going to do this.
It's the two writers from The Last of Us that are taking over for Uncharted 4.
Yeah, that should be interesting. In honor of, Naughty Dog celebrating its 30th anniversary, is there anything that you want to say about it right before we go?
It's one of the very few developers that could consistently make a great game or a series or new IP time and time again by trying to outdo what they did previously, and to keep challenging themselves, because what they're doing is completely amazing. You don't see this very often. Continuously to do it for 30 years, it just speaks to say that the people working there, they really love what they do.
Yeah, I agree. Naughty Dog is very much an example of when you give extremely talented people the free reins to do what they want to do, they'll turn in some amazing projects. And when you look back and think about each generation of consoles, every time you think of the best games, a Naughty Dog game is in the discussion. For the original PlayStation, everyone loves the Crash Bandicoot games. For the PS2, everybody loves the Jak games. PS3, Uncharted, and The Last of Us are some of the best remembered games for that generation. I'm really excited to see what they do in the future. I will say I personally hope they don't do another Last of Us. With the way that game ended, I kind of just want them to leave it there.
there was some discussion with Neil, who is one of the writers for The Last of Us and Uncharted, is that when they're discussing that, whether or not they're discussing it, there'd be a sequel to the Joel and Ellie story, or make it an anthology series where it's completely new people, but set in the same universe.
To be quite honest, I would actually prefer it to be an anthology series, because I remember Armin from Comic Book Cast was discussing about it when I guest starred in the Naughty Dog podcast with him and Joel, that, why don't we travel to the other parts in the world in which how they're going through it, like maybe, to Europe or maybe to China or something like that. Let's see a different perspective of how the other people are going through in this disease. I would be really interesting to find out. I mean, leave the Joel and Ellie story behind. We already know a little bit about it. You can always do DLC of it like they did with the DLC discussing about more of Ellie's story. I would like to see, more people going through it and maybe explore some other areas. That would be really nice. I mean, if they never do a sequel to The Last of Us, it's not going to kill me. I never thought that they would ever do another Uncharted game, but with the direction that they're going at, I could see it kind of happening. It would be nice if they would do another, Crash Bandicoot or Jak and Daxter game, but for the most part, whatever game that Naughty Dog is doing, I really am looking forward to. I really am appreciative that Naughty Dog is able to craft amazing games that are so different, and they're able to go through each generation. I cannot wait to see what their next game is going to be. I really respect them as a game developer. They do amazing work. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to whatever game that Naughty Dog releases. So, anything else we have to say about it right before we go, or you think that should be it?
Just one thing is that you should expect some good things from Naughty Dog, especially since they got enough people to split into two teams, while one team is working on the Uncharted 4. There is another team that's working on something else that most people don't know what they're doing yet.
Oh, I like surprises.
Yeah.
Alright, I think that should be it for this episode of Casual Chats. So, Clancy, do you have anything to plug or self-promote right before we go?
Well, I'm a part of the Something Heroic podcast that I do with Tim on his channel Something Cinematic. It's where we discuss all rumors and news involving comic book movies. Those go up on Tuesday, so be sure to check us out.
Okay, and how about you, Tristen?
Check out the Comic Book Cast for reviews and stuff. I'm on like 3 of the podcasts: Control Breakers, Operation Otaku, which is an animated podcast. Check out the Let's Play channel I run with Patricia and some of the other guys, PlayStation, and just keep watching and keep listening.
Yeah, and as for me, check out our stuff on Manic Expression, check out our stuff on PlayStation. We got some new stuff coming up, new casual chats with a very special guest, and new Turtle Talk coming in. I know that we're overdue, but please be patient. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Clancy, Tristen, thank you so much for joining.
No, that's good.
Thank you.
Alright, and that should be it for this episode of Casual Chats, and we hope to catch you in the next one, so take care.